Hello, welcome back to English with Aisha Siddiqui. Today we'll be doing a topic of second year BA students of special English. We have already completed the objective correlative of TS Eliot, and we'll be moving forward to a very new topic of poetry, that is pathetic fallacy. Pathetic fallacy. What do you mean by word? And what is the purpose of it, where all it was used, and many more things will be done in this video. So let's start. Okay, pathetic fallacy in the context of English poetry. Origin of the term. Let's see from where this word was introduced. What does it mean? And who has removed it? Pathetic fallacy was a term first coined by John Ruskin to attack the sentimentality that was common to the poetry of the late 18th century. So I'm just reading it back here. Pathetic fallacy was a term first coined by John Ruskin to attack the sentimentality that was common to the poetry of the late 18th century and which was rampant among poets including Burns, Blake, Wordsworth, Shelley, and Keats. Wordsworth supported this use of personification based on emotion by claiming that objects derive their influence not from properties inherent in them, but from such as are bestowed upon them by the minds of those who are conversant with or affected by these objects. Now let's see what did John Ruskin, who first termed this, what did he discuss of pathetic fallacy? When modern painters explains that emotional distortion characterizes the art of literature since romantics, Ruskin places major emphasis upon the fact that an excited state of the feelings make a person for the time more or less irritational. For this awareness of the effect of emotion comes his definition of pathetic fallacy. All violent feelings have the same effect. They produce in us a falseness in all our impression of external things, which I would generally categorize as the pathetic fallacy. So, what does pathetic fallacy mean according to him? All violent feelings have the same effect. That means it's going to do something wrong and bad, negative. And they produce all the falseness in all impressions to external things. So they do all type of evil things, which I would generally categorize as pathetic fallacy. That means he will say all these feelings as pathetic fallacy. Ruskin's discussion of the pathetic or emotional fallacy. What does he mean by pathetic fallacy? It means emotions coming out in a little negative way. Directly confronts the problems of basing a theory of art upon emotions. He always tried to demonstrate that an art centered on the feelings was not inevitable solipsistic, and this continuing struggle to protest his notion of painting and poetry from the dangers of subjectivity turns out to be as paradigmatic of his age as was the course of his religious belief. Now, what was the problem of false appearance? Let's see. His introduction of the problem of false appearance reveals two kinds of poetic falsehood, only one of which he calls the pathetic fallacy. Before concerning himself with the distortions of deep emotion, he first explains the delightful fallacies of fancy. As an example, he quotes these lines from Oliver Wendell Holmes' Asteria, which describes the spendthrift crocus bursting through the mold, naked and shivering with his cup of gold. So he's actually describing pathetic fallacy in these lines. Ruskin first comments that while very beautiful, these lines are none the less untrue. So he actually criticized it and he said that these lines are very beautiful, but they are not true. For the chorus, for the crocus is not spent thrift by Hardy, not gold but saffron. So he said that all these things are not gold and saffron. So these words that are used are not right. These lines exemplify the fallacy of willful fancy. So he says that why to say something that is false, all the false appearances, as people will fall into the category of all this, right? And which involves no real expectation that it will be believed. So he said that why to make fool out of people by just using words that are not right, or by using them in I mean, not in a wrong way, they're using it in poetry, but why to make it false and why to make it so dramatic and use all the wrong things? If, I mean, it is not gold and it is saffron, so why you have to say it is gold just to fool? So this was the problem of false appearance. In contrast to the fanciful, self-conscious distortions of which Ruskin opposes the other error, that which the mind admits when affected strongly by emotion, and as instance, he presents these lines from Kingsley's Alton Locke. What are the lines? Let's see. They rode her in across the rolling foam, the cruel crawling foam. From this point of view, then the distorting effects of emotion, one understood correctly, are not that are not isolating, rather by manipulating a portion of reality which both speaker and listener share. The pathetic fallacy allows one to glimpse the passions within the consciousness of another human being. Since we know that foam does not crawl, and since we know that it cannot be cruel, when someone thus describes the sea, we understand that he or she suffers from grief. According to Ruskin, grief has no affected the speaker's mind, so distorted his vision of the world, and he attributes to the form the characteristics of a living being. In so doing, he tells us more about the state of mind, his interior world, than he does about the world of the reader. I mean, in the outside of his mind. And it is this psychological truth that moves and delights the reader. The distorted version of reality does not itself please us, but we can ignore it. For so long as we can see that the feeling is true, we pardon or we even pleased by the confessed fallacy of sight which it induces. We are pleased, for instance, with those lines of King's lays above quoted, but because the fallaciously described foam, but because they faithfully describe sorrow. Function of pathetic fallacy, what it does. The distortions of the pathetic fallacy function like the voice inflection which a speaker gives to a common shared language. They permit something to be communicated which it would be difficult to state directly. The pathetic fallacy then allows the poet to dramatize grief and joy, communicating them far more effectively than would be in a simple statement that the speaker suffers from sorrow or feels joy. So, joy or happiness is actually expressed too much, too emotionally in a false way. This was the meaning of pathetic fallacy. Now, role of natural science in this. Let's see. This idea that the pathetic fallacy effectively conveys truths of man's inner world makes it fulfill that Ruskin takes to be the role of art, which is to present things not as they are in themselves. So it actually shows that it's not real, it's not really showing, but people are assuming it just as the movies show. The role of natural science, but as they appear to mankind, science studies the relation of things to each other, but art studies only the relation to man, and it requires of everything. Only this, what that thing is to human eyes and human heart, what it has to say to men and what it has to become to them. So they're saying what is the natural science? Science has a relation between each other, but what literature has, it is a relation between man and its emotions. Pathetic fallacy, the attribution of human emotions or characteristic to inanimate objects or to nature. For example, angry clouds, a cruel wind. So all these things are known as pathetic fallacy when an inanimate object is given all the emotions. Isn't the rain so romantic? How can a rain be romantic? But we assume that the rain is romantic. So it is known as pathetic fallacy, is used to give human emotions to inanimate object, that is rain, for a very deeper effect. Giving human feelings or emotions to inanimate objects, usually used for establishing atmosphere in the text, just to improve the atmosphere, to reveal the feelings. Pathetic fallacy is used. Frequently reflects a character in a mood of a story. What is the mood of the character in a story is reflected by pathetic fallacy. It is an expression that endows inanimate things with human feelings. Nature must be gladsome when I was so happy. How can the nature be glancing? But it is just to show the emotions out. Angry clouds, harsh winds, happy sunshine. All these emotions are given to inanimate objects, is known as pathetic fallacy. Let's see an example of pathetic fallacy in a poem. The sky is low, the clouds are mean. A traveler flake of snow across a barn or through a rut debates if it will go. So they're all debating, and clouds are mean. What does this mean? All inanimate objects are giving emotions. A narrow wind complains all day. Can a wind complain? No, but they are given this emotion that they are maybe very sad and they are complaining. How someone treated him, how the wind is being treated. Nature, like us, is sometimes caught without her deeding. This is how pathetic fallacy, that means feelings are given to inanimate objects. Okay. What is the difference between pathetic fallacy and personification? As even in personification, feelings are given to inanimate objects. Just let's see what is the difference. All pathetic fallacy is personification, but not all personification is pathetic fallacy. So just remember this and you will know the difference. All pathetic fallacies are personification, but not all personification sentences can be pathetic fallacy. The role of pathetic fallacy in English poems, how pathetic fallacy took place in the poems. Because pathetic fallacy has found its way into so many poems that the reading public has come to believe that it is a poetic device. So everyone thinks that when like these words are being said, the sad cloud bursted and all, so it is only used in poems. It's a poetic device, but it is not. It is a normal saying. However, it is Ruskin's opinion that a close examination will show that the greatest poets do not often admit this kind of falseness, that it is the only second order of poets who can take much delight in it. So he actually wants to say that all the poets will not take a pathetic fallacy in the poem because it's not true what we are saying in the poetry. Ruskin places poets in one of the three classes. In the first rank are the creative poets, Homer, Dante, and Shakespeare. They compose his third class, and they are the men who, in spite of their emotion, see things as they are. They, to Johnson Ruskin, are the greatest poets because they are not using all negative, I mean, falseness in their poets, but they are original creative poets. Pathetic fallacies in the poems of Shelley. Let's see. Shelley gives example from Mont Blanc, sees the winds drinking the odors of the pines. So you can see this poetry of Shelley as an example to see pathetic fallacy, where she says that the winds are drinking and the glaciers creep like snakes. So this all is false. It cannot be happening really, but it is used to show more emotions. So what does David? David argues that these are not only figure of speech, whether an object is animate like a cat or a bee, or an inanimate like a thing. We have the capacity to reconstitute in our minds that forces that make it what it is, whether animate or inanimate, which in turn makes it more likely that we anticipate correctly what may or what not may. Pathetic fallacy. Let's see, John Keats. There are two things that he has done: ode or a Grecian. Now, this is a poetry that we are going to do in this book. We are going to do in our second year BA book. It is an example of pathetic fallacy. In the third semester, we are going to do it's the fifth poem, Ode on a Grecian Urn by John Keats. It's a very beautiful poetry, and we will see an example of pathetic fallacy in it. In order to achieve the purposes of clarity and convenience, Ruskin has arranged fallacies in two separate distinct classes. There is the fallacy of Vilnius fancy, which involves no real expectations that it will be believed. Then there is a fallacy caused by an excited state of feeling, making more or less irritation. So there are two types of classes that he's divided to. Perhaps John Keats have given the answer in his ode. So what we are going to do, he's given the answer to Ruskin. A fallacy which is in harmony with the rest of the poem and which makes the reader for the time being see with the eyes of the poet what he wants to say. A pathetic fallacy in Wordsworth's poem. Let's see. So, Daffodil by William Wordsworth is one of an example of pathetic fallacy. Today, the term is used more neutrally, and the phenomenon is usually accepted as an integral part of poetry. So, pathetic fallacy, that means giving feelings to inanimate objects, is taken very normal now. But at that time, Ruskin had removed he had done a criticism on this that it should not be used. But it emphasizes on relationships, how to remove emotions and how to express your feelings more properly. That is why pathetic fallacy is used. For instance, in Wordsworth's I wandered lonely as a cloud. So how can a cloud just wander lonely? But he has given a feeling. The speaker sees a field of daffodils tossing their heads in a spring or a sprightly dance, outdoing the nearby lake sparkling waves with the glee. So he has given actually emotions to the and about himself, the cloud, the flowers tossing their heads that humans can do. So he has used pathetic fallacy. To the same flower. This is also by William Wordsworth, is an example of pathetic fallacy. Then the fallacy of willful fancy is elaborated in Wordsworth's poem called To the Same Flower. This is a poem which, if you all need it, you all can take a screenshot of the screen. A very beautiful poem, an example of pathetic fallacy by William Wordsworth. The entire poem is written in a whimsical way which belies any thought that the fallacies might be believed. Now, Wordsworth has completely used the pathetic fallacy and he's given a lot of emotions to all the objects. So, personification is one type of willful fancies. One need not to read far before he discovers numerous lines where abstract icons such as sorrow, reason, truth, and personified. In cases like these, the writer is fully aware of these abstract qualities may not accurately be given human attributes. So you can see all these types of fallacies in this thing. Pathetic fallacies in Tennyson's poem mode. This is also a poetry, but by Tennyson. So you can see it is said that Tennyson's lyrics are a perfect blending of emotion, showing all the emotions to give the inanimate objects. Certainly, there is a perfect example of pathetic fallacy in his lyric poem. The young lover believes that even the flowers are responsive. So he's showing that the flowers have human quality of responsibility to the nearness of his loved one. The poem is lovely, and the fallacies might easily be the impression that came to him as he thought that of his love. So he's thinking of his love, and he's expressing his fallacy, I mean his emotions, through the flowers. There is no discordant note. So Ruskin insists that the pathetic fallacy so far has a fallacy is the sign of comparative weakness of mind for a poet. So he's criticizing this poet, um, that is Tennyson's lyrical poem. He's criticizing and saying that if a person has that mind level where he can explain his emotions without giving all these emotions to the objects, is a correct type of poet. Okay, pathetic fallacies in Victorian poetries. Let's see the Victorian poetries now. Pathetic fallacies were used in consciously and deliberately, especially during the Victorian period, where precise visuality and secularism may have discouraged certain interpretation of the world. Poets such as Michael Field, Thomas Hardy, Oscar Wilde employed versions of pathetic fallacy in ways that made clear and subjective and figurative labor of such description. So, in the Victorian period, also pathetic fallacy was actually used, and many people, almost all poets, use pathetic fallacy. Also, you can say normal words, that is personification, in the poetries. But Ruskin was a poet who criticized it and said that pathetic fallacy is not required to express your emotions. So I hope you all understood what is pathetic fallacy and who criticized it. It is John Ruskin who criticized it and who gave the name pathetic or pathetic fallacy. So the topic is done over here. In the next video, I'll be doing diction, and I am doing the 23rd page of this book wherein pathetic fallacy is done, and now I'll be starting with diction from poetry. Thank you so much for the ones who benefited from it. Give a thumbs up. Thank you.